For this sunset painting, we're going to be working wet on wet. So the first thing that we want to do is wet the paper. So I'm taking my 1-inch flat wash brush, and this is a Princeton Velvet Touch, and thoroughly wetting the entire paper. I am using the Arteza Expert paper, which is the one in 100% cotton, and thoroughly wetting it so that it stays wet throughout the entire painting. I'm going to begin by switching to my size 12 round brush and laying down a generous amount of poppy. As you see, as I'm laying it down, I'm adding higher saturations in some areas and watering it down in other areas. I want the sky to have a little bit of depth before we add in our pinkish red color. Next, I am going to ball up a paper towel, and you don't have to use a paper towel. Feel free to use anything you want. And I am picking up some of the paint in the middle of the paper, and this is going to be the sunspot. Taking my poppy, I am going in and adding a little bit more of a higher saturation of this color into the sky, just in different places. It doesn't have to be all in one. You want light areas and you want darker areas. Then I'm going to take a clean brush. So I wash off my brush and I dry it off on the paper towel a little and soften the edges of the sunspot that we just made. You can do this immediately after doing the sunspot or a little later, completely up to you. We just want the middle to stay as light as possible, and we want to soften the edges of the sun. Now that my sunspot is just the way I want it, I am going to take a little bit of Ruby Rose. And Ruby Rose does have sort of a pinkish undertone, but it goes so lovely with the poppy. And when it blends out into this like beautiful warm orange color. So I'm going to take a little bit of the Ruby Rose and add it to the skies along the sides. And I'm just gonna, to begin with, I'm going to use some sweeping motions just to get it blocked out in the sky. So our paper is still wet, so that means it's going to spread nicely. And now I'm gonna take some of this poppy. My brush is a little bit dirty, so I'm gonna clean that off first. I'm gonna take some of this poppy and start mixing it in with the Ruby Rose, and then just filling in any areas that are just way too light. And I'm putting the poppy right over the Ruby Rose to make it a little bit more orange and tone down some of those pink undertones. And you'll see that I'll begin alternating between poppy and Ruby Rose to get that perfect orange reddish shade. So feel free to do that until you get the tone that you like. Continue blocking out your warmer areas until you are satisfied with the layout. Once you are satisfied with the layout, begin rounding out some of the edges. So what I prefer to do is take Poppy and round out the top edges of Ruby Rose with the Poppy. This will give it a nice orange glow above the warm red. Continue doing this to all or some of the warm areas that you have to break it up and to give a little bit of fluff to the sky. Make sure that your sky is completely dry before moving on to the next part. Once my sky has completely dried, I am going to switch to a size 8 Princeton Heritage. And I'm going to take a bit of that live oak and run it across the very bottom of the sky. And this is going to be the beginning of our field. So you can go in light or medium, but just don't go in too dark because we are going to add a little bit of color to this to give it a bit more dimension. With that same brush, I'm going to begin some upward flicking motions. So using the very tip of our brush, we are going to start at the bottom and pull the paint up in a flicking motion. So in order to get the blades of grass thin at the top, you want to flick the brush up, not just drag it. I am going to alternate between using my size 8 and my size 4 brush so that I can get varying widths in my blades of grass. So continue doing this all the way to the ends of the paper. Feel free to make the blades of grass tall and short and not just all the same size. You want to vary them a little bit. Now I'm switching exclusively to the size 4 round brush, and I'm adding some thinner blades across the entire bottom part, but I am adding them longer than the original blades of grass that we initially put down. If the bottom of your paper begins to dry, feel free to add a bit more paint, as I am doing here. Now I'm taking my Arteza spot brush and I'm loading it with paint, and I am making even longer blades across the bottom of the paper. Now this spot brush is very thin, so I'm going to have these stick out just a little bit more. While I am adding the thinner blades of grass with the spot brush, I am going to have a few blades of the wheatgrass jutting out. And I'm not going to add too many because I don't want to detract too much from the sky. So I'm going to add 3 or 4 just really long blades of the wheatgrass along each side. And now I am adding the little tufts to the end of the wheatgrass, still using the Arteza spot brush. And if you happen to put your hands in the paper, such as I did, then you can go ahead and wet the bottom again. But since the top of it has dried, I have to add a few more strokes into the blades of grass. Now finally, I am going back to my size 4 Princeton Heritage, and I am dipping into Wormhole. Now the paint is still wet at the bottom, which is what I want because I want this to blend in once I start adding the strokes. So with Wormhole, which is a black, I am going to add some more blades of grass just along the bottom, so they're not going to stick up and out like the brown ones did, the ones with live oak. They're not going to do that. They're just going to be about along the bottom so that we could show a bit of definition along the bottom, since that is in the foreground and it's not in the background. We want that area to just be a little bit darker. So instead of just adding the wormhole across the entire bottom of the paper, what we're going to do is add the blades of grass with the black to give it a little bit of dimension and to show that that is in the foreground. And with that, your piece is done. Feel free to add some birds in the sky or any other little detail that you'd like, and you are done. So I hope that you enjoyed this piece, and I'll see you next week with our next tutorial.